Paris, 1939. Music drifted through the open windows of a quiet apartment on the Rue de la Faisanderie. Soft notes from a sitar, the delicate sound rising above the city that was already beginning to fear the coming storm. At the instrument sat a young woman, slender, dark-eyed, calm as moonlight. Her name was Noor Inayat Khan, daughter of an Indian mystic and an American musician. She was 25 years old, and the world she loved was about to end. Child of two worlds. Noor was born in Moscow in 1914, when Europe was at the edge of its first Great War. Her father, Hazrat Inayat Khan, was a Sufi teacher, a man who believed that all religions were threads of the same divine song. Her mother, Aura Ray Baker, was an American woman who had given up comfort for love. Together, they created a small world of music, poetry, and silence, a place where faith and beauty could coexist. When the revolution began, the family fled to London, then to France, settling in a small house near Paris called Fazl Manzil, the House of Blessing. There, Noor grew up surrounded by gardens, birds, and her father's disciples who came to learn the way of peace. She was a child of contradictions, gentle but restless, shy yet filled with an almost sacred determination. When her father died in 1927, the responsibility of caring for the family fell to her. She was only 13, but she understood loss better than most adults ever would. "The world is full of suffering," her father had once told her, "but within every heart lies the power to heal it." That line stayed with her forever. The writer and the dreamer. By her 20s, Noor was already known in Parisian literary circles. She wrote children's stories for French radio, tales about animals and friendship, filled with gentleness and quiet wisdom. Her voice on the air was soft and melodic, like a lullaby. But outside the studio walls, Europe was cracking apart. The Nazi march across the continent sent millions fleeing, and when France surrendered in 1940, Noor's world of harmony shattered overnight. Her mother wept when they heard the news of occupation. Noor didn't cry. She stood by the window, listening to the German broadcasts echoing across the city, and whispered, "If there is to be war in the world, then I will fight it with truth." From peace to purpose. The family escaped to England in one of the last civilian ships leaving Bordeaux. It was a grey, rain-soaked voyage, frightened faces, children clinging to mothers, the thunder of distant guns. But Noor stood on deck, her notebook pressed to her chest, writing lines that would later appear in her diary. "If one must die, let it be for something greater than oneself." In London, she volunteered for the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, WAAF, the female branch of the Royal Air Force. She learned Morse code, navigation, and wireless operation. Her instructors found her quiet but fiercely focused, almost unnervingly so. They didn't know that the gentle girl in the corner who wrote bedtime stories about peace was preparing to send coded messages that could decide the fate of entire armies. A quiet flame. To her comrades, Noor seemed too fragile for war. She didn't curse, didn't drink, didn't joke like the others. Yet when asked why she had joined, she said simply, "Because I cannot bear to see anyone enslaved." Her superiors noticed her precision and calm under pressure. That was when a man from the Special Operations Executive, SOE, approached her. He spoke quietly, offering her a position that sounded almost impossible. Go back to occupied France as a radio operator, the most dangerous job in Europe. You would be alone, he warned. If caught, you would last 48 hours. Noor looked at him and said, "Then I shall have to be invisible for 49. The choice. That night, she walked through the fog-draped streets of London, past darkened houses and shuttered shops. She thought of her father's words, that all life is one, that love is the only truth. And yet, in this new world of bombs and barbed wire, love had to take another form. She went home and wrote a letter to her mother. "Do not worry for me. If I must die, it will be in the service of freedom, and freedom is the same as God." The next morning, she signed her name on the SOE recruitment papers. Her code name would be Madeleine. Her mission? to bring a nation back its voice. The girl who once spoke of peace would now speak for resistance. Her music would become a signal, her story a whisper in the dark. London, 1942. Fog rolled through the narrow streets like a living thing, curling around the blacked-out windows of wartime England. In a quiet mansion near Baker Street, the headquarters of the Special Operations Executive, SOE, a group of recruits waited in silence. Among them sat Noor Inayat Khan, her dark eyes calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. To anyone passing by, she looked like a teacher, perhaps a poet. In truth, she was about to become a soldier in a war of ghosts. The making of Madeleine. Her instructors didn't know what to make of her. She wasn't like the others. Not tough, not cynical. She refused to carry a gun. When asked why, she said quietly, "Violence cannot create peace, but I can send a message." That message would soon travel across the Channel, into the heart of Nazi-occupied France. Training was merciless. She was taught how to parachute, to memorize codes, to dismantle a radio in complete darkness. Every mistake could mean death, for her network, for the people sheltering her. She learned how to move through a city without being seen, how to lie under interrogation, how to smile at a stranger who might be Gestapo. Yet through it all she remained gentle. Her instructors called her too soft for this work, but her final evaluation read, quiet, idealistic, unbreakable faith. They didn't realize that what looked like softness was something stronger than steel, the weight of a signal. In the final phase of her training, Noor was taken to a small cottage on the outskirts of Hampshire, a mock safe house designed to simulate occupied Paris. There, she learned to live as a shadow. She practiced sending and receiving Morse code under pressure, the rhythmic tapping of her key echoing like a heartbeat through the wooden walls. Every message had to be perfect. 3 errors, and the enemy could triangulate her position. At night she would sit alone, looking up at the faint stars beyond the blackout curtains, whispering to herself. Each signal is a voice. Each voice is a soul calling to be free. She wrote those words in her training journal, the last line before her departure. The final briefing. June 1943. The war had entered its cruelest rhythm. The Allies were planning new operations. The Gestapo had doubled its arrests. Noor was summoned to a dark office where a man named Maurice Buckmaster, head of the SOE's French section, handed her a sealed folder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It contained her mission. Codename, Madeleine. Destination, Paris. Objective: maintain radio contact between London and the remnants of the Prosper network, whose agents had been hunted nearly to extinction. He looked at her with quiet pity. "You'll be the only operator left in Paris. You understand what that means?" She nodded. "It means I will be the last voice London hears." Buckmaster hesitated, then handed her a small silver cross. "Keep this," he said.
"For luck." "I don't believe in luck," she replied.
"Only in duty." Crossing the Channel. 2 nights later, she boarded a Lysander aircraft under the cover of darkness. The pilot offered her a cigarette. She smiled and refused. She was dressed in a plain wool coat, her hair pinned up, her suitcase containing nothing but a radio transmitter, a codebook, and a photograph of her family. As the plane crossed the English Channel, the waves below flashed silver under moonlight. Noor closed her eyes and whispered a prayer in Urdu. "May my heart remain clear, even in darkness." When the plane touched down in a field near Alger, France, she jumped into the damp grass, kissed the ground, and vanished into the night. The city of shadows. Paris had changed. The city of light was now a city of whispers. Gestapo patrols on every corner, curfews, checkpoints, fear. Noor moved through it like a ghost. She rented a small attic room under a false name, kept her radio hidden under the floorboards, and carried her codes written in invisible ink on a sheet of music. Every night, She climbed to the rooftop and sent messages back to London. The rhythm of her Morse key was steady, beautiful, almost musical, a heartbeat pulsing in the dark. Dot, dot, Liberté. Each transmission was a risk. Each one kept the resistance alive. The poet had become a weapon. Her music was now the sound of war, quiet, invisible, and unstoppable. Paris, autumn 1943. Rain fell like static against the rooftops, a whisper that hid another whisper. The faint, rhythmic pulse of a Morse key. Somewhere in the heart of the occupied city, behind shuttered windows and blackout curtains, Noor Inayat Khan sat in silence, her headphones pressed tight to her ears, the radio transmitter humming faintly under a blanket. Her call sign, Madeleine. Her voice, the last one London could still hear. The last operator in Paris. Within weeks of her arrival, the entire Prosper network had collapsed. Agents were captured one by one. Some vanished into Gestapo basements. Others betrayed their comrades to buy a few more days of life. By September, Noor was the only radio operator still active in the city. Every transmission she sent carried death with it. For herself, for those she worked with, for anyone whose name she spoke aloud. But she never faltered. Every night, she climbed to a different rooftop, set up her aerial under the cover of clouds, and transmitted to London for 5, sometimes 10 minutes, never longer. The Gestapo's listening vans roamed the streets below, scanning for her signal. They called her die unsichtbare Frau, the invisible woman. The sound of danger Morse code became her heartbeat. Her fingers moved like they were playing an instrument, her eyes flicking over the clock. Every second measured, every breath rehearsed. She could no longer remember what her own voice sounded like. At night, when the world outside slept in fear, she sent messages that could move armies. London, Madeleine reporting. Railway sabotage successful. Request supplies. God save France. The cold of the attic seeped through her shoes, but she didn't stop. She imagined her father's teachings, that music was the purest form of prayer, and in her coded rhythm, she found a strange kind of grace. Each pulse, she once wrote in her hidden diary, is a note of faith. The enemy hears noise, I hear meaning. The hunters close in. By October, the Gestapo had narrowed their search to a few city blocks. They had intercepted her signal dozens of times, each time triangulating a little closer. Still, she refused to flee. Her British handlers begged her over radio. Madeleine, you must return, it's too dangerous. She replied simply, if I leave, France will fall silent. She began moving constantly, switching apartments, changing names, altering her hair. Her typewriter was her companion, her suitcase her only home. She carried her radio everywhere, packed in pieces, ready to vanish within minutes. To the neighbours, she was just Mademoiselle Nora Baker, a quiet young woman who wrote stories and rarely spoke. To the Gestapo, she was a phantom that refused to die. The invisible resistance. Noor worked closely with scattered members of the resistance, couriers, saboteurs, priests. She brought them orders from London, arranged weapons drops and kept alive the fragile thread of coordination that the Nazis had nearly severed. She had no weapons, no uniform, only a radio and a heart that would not break. Once, a French partisan named André called her une sainte, a saint. She smiled and said, no, André, saints do not lie every day. Still, even he admitted, she was the bravest of us all, because she was the quietest. The betrayal waiting in the shadows. By November, Noor knew her time was running out. The Gestapo had captured several agents who had worked with her. They knew there was still one operator transmitting in Paris, and they were closing in. Then, one night, her contact, a Frenchwoman named Renée Gary, turned traitor. For a handful of francs and the promise of survival, she gave the Gestapo the address of a certain English girl with a radio. On October 13, 1943, the secret police stormed the house at 40 Rue Erlanger. Noor had just finished sending a message. She grabbed her papers, tried to flee across the rooftop, but they were waiting for her at every exit. The Gestapo surrounded her, guns drawn. "Hands up!" "9," she said softly. "I am not afraid." They struck her, dragged her down the stairs, and tore the transmitter from her arms. But even as they searched her, they found no codes. She had burned them seconds before they entered. The silence that echoed, that night, London waited for her signal. The static came, then nothing. Noor Inayat Khan, Madeleine, had gone silent. But silence, like courage, can speak louder than words. And in the empty airwaves above Europe, London's operators kept listening, hoping to hear her again. She was captured, but not defeated. The last voice London heard had fallen quiet, but her message still pulsed through the night. Liberté, Paris, October 1943. The air inside 84 Avenue Foch, headquarters of the Gestapo, smelled of smoke, sweat, and fear. Thousands had entered these walls. Few had ever left. And now, sitting in a small, windowless room, her wrists bound and her face bruised, was Noor Inayat Khan, the soft-spoken radio operator they had hunted for months. The man across from her was Ernst Vogt, a Gestapo interrogator known for his patience. He didn't shout, he simply smiled. "You are Madeleine, yes?" "No," Noor answered. "Then why did we find your transmitter?" "Because you were meant to." The interrogation. The questions came day after day. Names, codes, drop points. Each answer could destroy another life, but Noor gave them nothing. When words failed, they used fists. When fists failed, they used whips. When even that failed, they tried deception. "Your friends have all talked," one of them lied. "London has forgotten you." She looked up slowly. "Then I speak for them all." They threatened her family, promised her freedom, even offered to send her home if she cooperated. She only said, "I was born free. You cannot send me home." After several days, her cell walls were stained with blood, her own from her wrists where the ropes had bitten deep. And yet, each morning she stood when they entered, straight-backed, silent, unbroken. The escape attempt. One night, after nearly a month of confinement, Noor and two other prisoners, John Starr and Leon Fay, managed to break their locks using a stolen key. They climbed onto the roof of the Gestapo building, crawling across the rain-soaked tiles toward freedom. But Paris was silent and hostile. The rooftops offered no cover. A guard saw them, shouted, and opened fire. Noor froze for a split second, just enough time for them to catch her. Dragged back down the stairs, she was beaten mercilessly. But when the commandant demanded to know how she escaped, she only smiled through her bloodied lips and whispered, "Because you built your cages too small." The name that would not die. The Gestapo knew she was valuable. They discovered her notebooks, filled not with codes, but with music and half-finished fairy tales written in French and Urdu. Even her captors were confused. "Why would a spy write stories?" one officer asked. "Because words are stronger than fear," she replied. They tortured her again, and again she refused to speak. Finally, they marked her as highly dangerous, must be kept in total isolation. She was transferred to Germany, to Pforzheim prison, where she was chained hand and foot for 10 months. There, in the cold darkness, she sang softly to herself. Sufi songs her father had taught her as a child. The guards called her Das Geistermädchen, the ghost girl. Letters from the abyss. From her cell, she wrote invisible letters, on scraps of paper, on the walls, even in her mind. One was found after the war, carved faintly into stone. Freedom is not a place. It is the light you carry when the world goes dark. The other prisoners said they could hear her humming through the walls at night, faint, steady, almost otherworldly. It gave them strength. They began to call her not Madeleine, but La Lumière, the light. The decision. By September 1944, as Allied troops advanced into France, the Gestapo began erasing evidence of their crimes. Noor was ordered to be sent to Dachau, the camp of final silence. The transport arrived at night. 4 women in chains were loaded into a truck. They didn't speak. Noor looked out through the bars, watching the dark countryside roll past, and whispered a prayer. May I die without hatred. She had lost everything, her freedom, her home, her name, but not her faith. Even in betrayal, she remained pure. Even in captivity, she remained free. Germany, September 1944. The train moved through the Black Forest night with no lights and no destination on the map. Inside the cattle cars, women stood packed together, their breath forming a faint mist in the cold air. Among them, chained at the wrists and ankles, was Noor Inayat Khan, prisoner NN, Nacht und Nebel, night and fog. Those letters meant one thing: to disappear without a trace. She did not cry, she did not speak. She simply pressed her palms together, eyes closed, whispering an ancient Sufi prayer. I am the soul of peace, even in the storm. Ravensbrück. When the train doors opened, a cold wind cut through the silence. The women stumbled into Ravensbrück, the largest concentration camp for women in the Reich. Dogs barked, guards shouted, searchlights swept over shaven heads and tattered uniforms. Noor was placed in total isolation. Her cell was small, the walls wet and grey. She had no bed, no light, no name, only a number and the echo of her own heartbeat. Every morning she was dragged out and interrogated again, not for information anymore, but out of spite. Still, she said nothing. A fellow prisoner years later recalled seeing her once through a crack in the door. Her face was bruised, but her eyes, they were shining. I thought she was an angel. Even the guards began to speak her name in whispers. They called her Die Stille, the silent one. 10 months of darkness. In Pforzheim she had been chained. In Ravensbrück she was erased. Weeks blurred into months, hunger, cold, the screams of other women in the night. Yet somehow Noor endured. She prayed silently, reciting the poetry her father had taught her. She imagined her mother's face, the music of her sitar, the laughter of her younger brother Vilayat. She remembered light. Sometimes she sang, so softly that only the walls could hear her. A guard once shouted for her to stop. She looked up and said, "You cannot stop a song if it is already in the air." The woman who had once sent coded messages now sent something deeper, a vibration of courage that passed through the barracks, through the despair, through the night itself. The transfer. In early September 1944, 4 women were selected for transfer. No reason was given. They were loaded into a covered truck under heavy guard. Among them were Yolanda Beekman, Eliane Plumen, Madeleine Dammermont, and Noor Inayat Khan. The truck drove for hours through fog and rain until it reached Dachau. It was a camp built for extermination, not imprisonment. When the gates opened, the smell of ash and death filled the air. The women were led to a small yard behind the crematorium. They knew what was coming. None of them begged. Noor's chains rattled softly as she turned to one of the guards and said in French, Liberté. He didn't understand the word, but the sound of it lingered in the air like a note of music. The final morning. At dawn on September 13, 1944, she was brought before the camp commandant. He asked if she had anything to say. She looked at him steadily. I am not afraid to die. Moments later, she was struck to the ground and shot at close range. Her body fell silently, her soul already elsewhere. The guard who fired the shot would later admit he had never seen such calm. Her last word, whispered just before the bullet struck, was the same as her life's purpose. Liberté. After the silence. Her remains were never recovered, but her name endured, passed among survivors like a secret prayer. To them, she was Madeleine the Brave, the Indian princess, the light. When the war ended, a British officer visiting Dachau found her name scratched faintly into a wall. He stood for a long time, then whispered, She never broke. Not once. She entered the war with music in her heart and left it with silence on her lips. But even in death, that silence became a song, one the world still hears when it speaks the word freedom. London, 1949. The war was over, the ruins swept, and Europe was learning to breathe again. But among the quiet gravestones and new memorials, one name refused to rest. Noor Inayat Khan. The world had almost forgotten her. She left no family of her own, no uniform, no grave. But those who had known her could not forget the calm in her voice, the strange strength behind her gentleness, and the word that echoed through her final breath. Liberté. The search for truth. For years, the story of Madeleine was buried deep in SOE files stamped top secret. Even her mother, Aura Ray Baker, didn't know how or where her daughter had died. Then, in 1946, British investigators began to trace what had happened to missing SOE agents. From the testimonies of camp survivors, a picture began to emerge, of a woman who never revealed her comrades, who endured isolation and torture, and whose final word had been freedom. When Noor's mother heard the report, she closed her eyes and whispered, "She has returned to the light." She refused to mourn in black. Instead, she placed a single white flower on Noor's photograph, a symbol of purity, not loss. Recognition. In 1949, King George VI posthumously awarded Noor the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian decoration for gallantry. The citation read, "For her courage, steadfastness, and devotion to duty while serving with the Special Operations Executive, she gave her life in the service of freedom." France followed with the Croix de Guerre and Médaille de la Résistance, honouring her as one of their own. In both London and Paris, officials stood in silence as her name was read aloud, a name that had once been erased from every Gestapo record, now carved in marble. Her brother Wilayat Inayat Khan, himself a teacher of Sufism, said, "She was the perfect warrior, because she fought without hatred." The memorials. In 2012, nearly 70 years after her death, the United Kingdom unveiled a bronze statue of Noor in Gordon Square Gardens, London. The likeness shows her standing tall, in her WAAF uniform, looking forward, calm, composed, unarmed. Beneath her feet are engraved her name and her final word, Liberté. Visitors leave flowers and folded notes at the base. Some write, "Thank you," others simply, "You were light." In France, at Suresnes, a plaque bears her name alongside the heroes of the resistance. In Dachau, a single white rose blooms near the execution yard each September, planted by a survivor who remembered her voice. The music returns. Noor's writings were later rediscovered, children's stories she had penned before the war. Among them was a tale about a nightingale who refuses to stop singing, even when caged. It ends with the line, "The song that is born from silence can never die." Historians now believe she wrote it as a metaphor for herself, the poet who became a signal, the dreamer who defied darkness not through force, but through faith. Her music, once nearly lost, is performed again. Her sitar, found decades later, is displayed beside her medals. Even her Morse key was preserved, the instrument through which she sang to London. Legacy. Today, Noor Inayat Khan stands as one of the most extraordinary heroines of World War II, a woman whose power came not from violence or rage, but from purity and will. She fought for a France that wasn't her homeland, under a flag that wasn't her own, for an ideal that belonged to everyone. In classrooms across Britain and India, her story is now taught as a lesson in moral courage, the belief that even the gentlest soul can face evil and not become it. Epilogue. In the archives of the SOE, among the dusty folders of forgotten names, there is a small handwritten note on the cover of her file. It reads, "Madeleine, executed at Dachau, September 1944. Never once gave information." Beneath it, someone else added a single line, written years later in blue ink. "She remained true to the end." She was a writer who spoke with silence, a princess who chose war, a woman who died for peace. And when the world went dark, she became its light.